My name is Ellie Turner, and I'm 15 years old. I remember the night my parents decided to go out for their couple's night. They hadn't done it in a while. Life was always so busy. So, when they asked if I'd be okay staying home alone, I was more than happy to oblige. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? It was just a quiet evening at home. It had been snowing all day, the kind of heavy snow that makes the world outside look like something from an old postcard. Peaceful and still. But inside, my house felt warm and safe, and for once, I didn't mind being alone. The plan was simple. I would binge watch some shows, eat junk food, and maybe catch up on some texting with my friends. The usual. The snowstorm outside raged harder as the night went on, but that didn't bother me. The house was cozy, and the faint creaking of the old floorboards was oddly comforting. The smell of the homemade chicken soup my mom had left in the fridge lingered in the air. It was around 9 p.m. when the first thing happened. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when the doorbell rang. I froze. Who could that be? It was a blizzard outside. No one in their right mind would be out there at this hour. I cautiously stood up and peered through the peephole. No one. I checked the window by the door, and still, no one. A chill ran through me. Maybe I imagined it. I dismissed it as nothing, just the wind playing tricks, and went back to my phone, shrugging it off. But then the doorbell rang again, a little more insistent this time. My heart started to race. What if someone was stranded out there, needing help? I thought about the many times my parents had warned me to never open the door to strangers. But the snowstorm was brutal. Maybe they needed to come in to get warm? I went to the door slowly, cautiously. I checked the peephole once more. No one. I let out a breath of relief, but then, before I could step away, I heard something even stranger, a soft tapping on the glass beside the door. I whirled around, my eyes scanning the room. It was as if someone had tapped the glass from outside. But when I checked the window, again, nothing. The snow was falling in sheets, no movement, nothing visible through the frost-covered window. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a branch. I thought. The wind was fierce, and branches were known to scrape the windows. Still, a nagging feeling of unease settled in my stomach. I double-checked the locks on the door. I didn't know why, but I felt safer doing it. I had this overwhelming sense that something was off. I made sure the windows were all locked as well. I tried to ignore it and sat back down, hoping that the store would distract me. I texted my mom to check in. Hey, everything okay? The storm's getting pretty bad out there. We're good, just having some wine. Stay safe. Text me if you need anything. She texted back. I set my phone down, but just as I did, I heard something in the distance. A noise, faint, almost muffled, like footsteps on the second floor. I froze, my breath hitched in my chest. My parents weren't supposed to be home until late, and Max, my little brother, was at a sleepover. I crept quietly toward the stairs, trying not to make a sound. My heart hammered in my chest as I stood at the bottom of the staircase, listening. The house was silent again. Maybe it was just the house settling. But then, I heard it again, this time clearer. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. They were coming from the hall, directly above me. I stood frozen, the blood draining from my face. There was no way anyone should be up there. I checked the locks, checked the windows. Everything was fine. The only other people who had a key were my parents, but they were hours away. I backed away from the staircase, suddenly desperate to get out of the house. I grabbed my phone again, only to find there was no service. The storm must have knocked out the signal. I heard another sound. This time it was a door creaking open. My breath caught in my throat. I was too scared to even move. Who was upstairs? The footsteps continued, now right above me, moving across the hallway. I swallowed, my throat dry as dust, and I turned to the kitchen, trying to be as quiet as possible. There, I grabbed a knife from the drawer. The handle was cold in my hand, but it gave me some sense of control, however small. I slowly began moving through the hallway. Every step I took felt like a thunderclap in the silence of the house. I crept toward the staircase and stopped at the bottom, holding my breath, listening for any sound that might indicate movement. Then it happened again. A door creaked open. This time it wasn't faint. It was loud, deliberate. The sound came from my parents' room at the end of the hall. I slowly ascended the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't think straight. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't leave. I had to know who was in the house. I reached the top of the stairs and hesitated at the corner. I didn't know what I was expecting, but nothing prepared me for the figure standing in the middle of the hall, just outside my parents' bedroom. A tall man, his face obscured by the shadows. He was wearing a dark coat, and his hand was pressed against the door to my parents' room. He stood motionless, as though listening for something. I wanted to scream, to call out, but the words stuck in my throat. My body wouldn't move. Then he turned slowly and I froze. His eyes, dark and cold, locked with mine. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I could barely breathe. He didn't speak. He didn't make a sound. But his presence was suffocating. My mind raced. Should I run? Should I fight? Should I scream? I had no idea. My body wouldn't respond. He took a slow step toward me. And then another. I snapped out of it, my instincts kicking in. I turned and ran for the stairs, the adrenaline pumping through me as I bolted down them. My heart was in my throat. I could hear him moving behind me, his footsteps echoing, growing closer. I reached the front door and pulled on the handle, but it wouldn't open. Locked. Panic surged through me. I tried to turn the lock, but my hands were shaking too violently. I could hear him just behind me. The cold draft from the door felt like a final warning. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone, dialing my parents in desperation. No signal, no service. The door rattled again, and I could feel his presence creeping up behind me. I turned, facing the empty hallway. But the worst part? There was no sign of anyone. The silence in the hallway was deafening, broken only by the soft tapping of footsteps growing closer. My pulse was pounding so loud, I could hear it in my ears. My legs felt like lead, frozen in place, despite every instinct telling me to run, to escape. I glanced desperately at the front door again, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the lock. The knob rattled but didn't budge. How was it locked? I always double-checked the deadbolt. My mind raced. What was happening? Was someone really in the house? Or had my fear twisted reality? I turned around, my back pressed to the door, eyes darting toward the hallway. There was no sound anymore, just the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. But the feeling that something was wrong. It was suffocating. I backed away from the door, inching my way down the hallway towards the stairs. I didn't dare look behind me. I was too terrified. My breathing was shallow, each exhale an attempt to calm my racing heart. But it only made it worse. The dark house, the heavy storm outside, and the feeling that something was in it with me. That's when I heard it. A whisper, soft but distinct. Ellie. I whipped around so quickly, I almost lost my balance. No one was there, just the dim shadows of the hallway. Stretching out in front of me, the voice had come from inside the house, but there was no sign of anyone. Ellie, it's safe. The voice came again, now lower, almost soothing. It was a man's voice, deep and calm, but there was something unnatural about it, something chilling. I felt my knees buckle, but I forced myself to move. The stairs. I had to get to the stairs. I needed a better vantage point. Maybe there was a way to escape. My legs felt like jelly, but I managed to make up the first 2 steps before I heard something worse than the voice. The door creaking open, the one to my parents' room. I turned and bolted up the stairs, the only sound now the pounding of my feet on the hardwood floors. At the top of the stairs, I glanced back. He was standing there. The man. He was standing in the dim hallway, illuminated only by the weak light coming from the stairwell. His eyes, those cold, dead eyes, locked onto mine. His face was expressionless, his body still as a statue. My body went rigid, the air thick with terror. Why are you running? His voice, once calm, now had an edge to it, like an almost mocking question. I didn't have an answer. I couldn't speak. My legs carried me backward instinctively. My arms raised in front of me as if I could somehow block whatever he might do. I turned and ran to the nearest room, my parents' bedroom. The lock. The deadbolt, I had to lock it. I slammed the door shut behind me and turned the lock, but there was no time to breathe. The room felt suffocating. Too small, too quiet, too isolated. The door rattled as someone tried to force it open. I froze, holding my breath, listening as the man's footsteps got closer to the door. Then the handle turned. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. No. Open the door, Ellie. The man said again, almost sing-song now, like he knew he had all the time in the world. I pressed myself against the door, my heart in my throat. Who are you? My voice shook, barely audible. What do you want? The silence that followed was worse than anything else. I could hear my pulse in my ears, my own ragged breathing as I pressed myself harder against the door. I tried again to call my parents. Still no signal. The doorknob jiggled once more, followed by the unmistakable sound of something sharp scraping across the surface of the door. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I turned my head slightly and saw that the lock was starting to twist. Slowly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I backed away from the door, my eyes scanning the room for anything I could use to defend myself. My parents' bedroom. Nothing seemed useful, but I had to try. The only thing I could think of was a lamp on the bedside table. I grabbed it, holding it up like a weapon. A sound came from outside the door. The man chuckled softly. You're just a kid, Ellie. You think a lamp will stop me? Suddenly, the door burst open. I gasped, my body jerking back in shock. But no one was standing there. The hallway was empty. No man. Just the howling storm outside. For a split second, I thought it was over, that I had imagined everything. Then I felt it, a hand on my shoulder. I screamed, spinning around, swinging the lamp wildly. Nothing. The room was empty. There was nothing but the eerie silence, the storm, and the oppressive sense of being watched. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then the phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. Mom, everything okay? We're on our way home. My heart leapt into my throat. I couldn't believe it. Was I hallucinating? Had everything been in my head? I checked the time. It was 1 a.m. I stood there in the silence of my parents' room, trying to regain control of my shaking hands. I needed to stay calm. I could still hear the storm outside. I could still hear nothing else. The storm was still raging outside, the wind howling with such force that the windows seemed to shake. It had been hours since my parents had left, but it felt like days had passed in the span of that one terrifying night. I sat curled up on the couch, my knees drawn to my chest, my hands trembling as I replayed the events in my mind over and over again. Was it real? Was it just my fear taking over, making me see things that weren't there? The house was eerily quiet now, save for the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows. The power had flickered back on, and the silence in the house seemed even more oppressive with the lights casting long shadows across the room. I heard the sound of a car engine pulling up outside, and my heart lurched in my chest. I knew it was them. My parents were finally home. I stood up quickly, feeling a mix of relief and dread wash over me. Relief because I wouldn't be alone in this anymore, and dread because I had no idea how they would react to what had happened. Would they believe me? Would they think I was imagining things? Or worse, would they get angry for overreacting? The front door opened, and my mom stepped inside, shaking the snow off her coat. My dad followed behind her, carrying a bag of groceries they'd picked up on the way back. They both smiled when they saw me. Hey, kiddo, how was your night? My dad asked, his voice warm but tired. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't pretend like everything was fine anymore. I couldn't just say I was okay, because I wasn't. I shook my head, my eyes welling up. Mom, Dad, something happened. My mom's smile faded as she looked at me, concern creasing her forehead. What do you mean, honey? What happened? I tried to steady my breath, but my voice shook as I recounted everything, from the strange knocks at the door to the footsteps upstairs. I told him about the feeling of being watched, the text that came from nowhere, and the figure I saw standing in the hallway. I explained how I tried to get out of the house, but every door was locked and the house felt like a prison. As I spoke, my dad's expression shifted from casual to serious, his brow furrowing with concern. My mom stayed silent, her face pale, listening intently. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Ellie?" My dad's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. "Are you sure you were alone?" I nodded quickly. "I was alone, Dad. Max wasn't here, and you guys were out. No one else was supposed to be here." My mom moved closer to me, her hands on my shoulders. "You must have been scared. I can't even imagine what that must have felt like." I looked up at her, my eyes pleading. "It was real, Mom. I know it was. I felt it. I wasn't imagining it." My dad took a deep breath and glanced at my mom. There was a moment of unspoken understanding between them before he turned back to me. "We need to call the police," he said, his tone firm. "What you're describing doesn't sound like a prank, Ellie. We need them to come here and investigate." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "Do you really think it was someone trying to break in?" He nodded. "It sounds like it. We need to be sure." My mom quickly grabbed her phone and dialed the number for the police. I heard her speaking to the dispatcher, explaining the situation. Her voice was calm, but I could tell she was shaken. I sat in silence, the weight of what had happened finally settling in. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was real, and now my parents were involved. The police were coming. As I waited, the house felt even more empty than before. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, and the wind howled against the walls, making the whole house creak and groan. The sense of being watched didn't go away. It lingered in the air, heavy and oppressive, after what felt like an eternity. There was a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. The police had arrived. I heard the door open, and 2 officers walked in, a man and a woman, both in uniform, their faces serious. My parents quickly introduced themselves, and the officers turned their attention to me. "Hi, Ellie," the female officer said gently, offering a warm smile. "We're here to help. Can you tell us exactly what happened?" I nodded, swallowing hard. I repeated my story, just as I had with my parents, but this time there was no comforting touch from my mom, no reassuring smile from my dad. This time it felt official. The officers took notes as I spoke, asking me questions for clarity, trying to make sense of everything I had described. The male officer turned to my parents once I finished. "We'll need to check around the house for any signs of forced entry. It's good that you called us when you did. If someone was in here, we want to make sure everything is secure." My dad nodded. "Do you think she's safe here tonight?" The female officer looked at me, her gaze thoughtful. It's hard to say without knowing what exactly happened. But if Ellie feels unsafe here, we can arrange for her to stay somewhere else tonight while we investigate further. I glanced at my mom, and she gave me a reassuring nod. "We'll stay here," I said quietly. "I just want this to be over." The officers made their way through the house, checking every window, every door, every corner. They took their time, their flashlights scanning every inch of the rooms, looking for any sign that someone had been inside. They even checked the locks on the windows and doors. When they finished, the male officer came back into the living room. "Well," he said, "there's no sign of forced entry. Everything seems secure. We'll have to file this as a suspicious incident for now. We'll send a patrol car to keep an eye on the house tonight, just in case." My dad sighed in relief. "Thank you. We appreciate you taking this seriously." The officers nodded, and after a few more questions and reassurances, they left. My parents closed the door behind them, and once again, we were alone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still here, watching,